There is one letter in the Torah that is written smaller than every other letter in the entire scroll. One single letter. And it happens right here, in the very first word of the Book of Leviticus. The word is Vayikra. And the last letter of that word, the Alef, is tiny, almost invisible. Now, why would God instruct Moses to write a letter so small you can barely see it? And why does it appear right here at the opening of a book that most people skip because they think it's just about animal sacrifices? The answer, according to the Zohar, changes everything about how you understand this book. Because Vayikra is not about sacrifice. It's about drawing close. It's about the architecture of how a human soul reconnects with the divine. And that tiny Alef is the key to the whole thing. Now, Leviticus is the book that most people skim past. If you've ever tried to read the Torah cover to cover, this is probably where you slowed down. It feels like an ancient manual for a temple that no longer exists. But the Zohar tells us that the spiritual secrets encoded in Vayikra are among the most powerful in the entire Torah. This is the book where heaven and earth meet, where the human being learns the mechanics of returning to God. Welcome to the Parashah series. This week we are looking at Parashat Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 5 verse 26. And we are going deep into the Zohar on this one. Let's start with the first word, Vayikra. It means, and he called. God called to Moses from the tent of meeting. Now, the Torah could have used a different word. It could have said Vayedaber, meaning he spoke, or Vayomer, he said. But it doesn't. It says Vayikra, he called. Rashi tells us this is a keriyah shel kibah, a calling of affection, a calling of love. This is not a command. This is an invitation. God is drawing Moses close the way a parent calls a child by name. There is tenderness in this word, but here's where it gets interesting. If you remove the Alef from Vayikra, you get a completely different word, Vayikar. And Vayikar means he happened upon, an accident, a random encounter. This is the exact word the Torah uses when God appears to the pagan prophet Bilaam. With Bilaam, it's random, it's incidental, there's no relationship there. So we have two realities sitting side by side, separated by a single letter. Vayikra, a deliberate calling rooted in love, and Vayikar, a random encounter with no depth behind it. The only difference between divine purpose and cosmic randomness is the word Alef. And that's not just a scribal curiosity. That's one of the most profound spiritual truths in the entire Torah. History itself, your own personal history, can be read two ways. Either there is a God who is calling to you, who knows your name, who is actively drawing you toward something, or it's all random. Things just happen. You get lucky, you get unlucky, and none of it means anything. The Alef is what separates those two worldviews. And the Alef is almost invisible. And the Alef in our scroll, it's written small, almost silent. The Zohar says this is deliberate. God's presence in your life will not always announce itself with thunder and lightning. Most of the time, it whispers. The Alef is nearly inaudible. You have to be quiet enough to hear it. You have to be paying attention. If you are not listening, Vayikra becomes Vayikar. The call becomes noise. Purpose becomes accident. So why is the Alef small? The Baal Haturim gives us the famous answer. Moses, in his humility, wanted to write Vayikar as if God merely happened upon him, the same language used for Bilaam. Moses did not want to elevate himself. He didn't want to claim a special relationship. God told him, no, write the Alef. So Moses wrote it, but he wrote it small. That's the compromise. The Alef is there, but it's humble. Now, the Zohar takes this further. The Zohar connects the small Alef to the principle of Tzimtzum, contraction. God's infinite light contracts itself to make room for creation. The small Alef is a picture of that same principle operating in the life of Moses. True spiritual greatness doesn't expand to fill every room. It contracts. It makes itself small so that others can exist, so that others can receive. There's a beautiful Kabbalistic teaching here about the contrast between Adam and Moses. In the Book of Chronicles, Adam's name is written with a large Alef. Adam knew he was the pinnacle of creation, and he let that awareness become pride. That pride led to the fall. Moses, on the other hand, knew everything Adam knew about his own greatness, and yet he contracted. He diminished the Alef. Not because he was ignorant of his gifts, but because he understood that every gift came from above. This is real humility, not denial of your capabilities, not false modesty. Real humility is knowing exactly what you carry and still recognizing that none of it originates with you. You are a vessel. You are a channel. The light flows through you, not from you. That is the small Alef. Now, let's talk about what most people think this book is about. Sacrifices. Leviticus opens with detailed instructions about offerings. And I understand why modern readers struggle with this. It's animals on an altar, blood on the corners. It feels ancient and maybe even disturbing. But the Zohar reveals something that completely reframes the entire system. The Hebrew word for offering is Korban, and the root of Korban is Karov, K-R-V. It means to draw near. A Korban is not a sacrifice in the way we use that word in English. It's not about losing something. It's not about punishment. A Korban is a vehicle for drawing close to God. The Zohar on Vayikra in section 3, folio 5, makes this explicit. Rabbi Zikiah asked Rabbi Shimon, why is it called Korban and not Keruf or Krifut, which would more directly mean closeness? And the answer goes deep into the Sefirotic architecture. The Zohar explains that a Korban creates a unification of the Sefirot. Specifically, it brings Zeir, Anpin, and Malkuth into alignment. It draws the 10 Sefirot closer to each other until they function as one. Think about what that means. When the Sefirot are fragmented, when Zeir, Anpin, and Malkuth are separated, the flow of divine light into the world is interrupted. There is distance between the upper worlds and our reality. The Korban is the mechanism that closes that gap. It's not about appeasing an angry God. God does not need your lamb. The Zohar is very clear on this. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says the nature of the divine light is pure sharing. There is no wrath to appease. The purpose of the Korban is to realign the spiritual architecture so that blessing can flow again. The Zohar also teaches that the root karof can be read as keraf, which means battle. And this is not a contradiction. Drawing close to God requires a war, not against God, but against our own nature, against the reactive consciousness that keeps us in separation. Every Korban was an act of spiritual warfare. You were taking something from the animal realm, from the level of base instinct, and elevating it through fire and intention back to its divine root. You were literally transforming dense matter into spiritual light. That's not primitive. That's technology. Vayikra lays out 5 primary types of offering, and each one maps to a different spiritual condition. The olah, the burnt offering, is entirely consumed on the altar. Nothing remains. This corresponds to total surrender, total dedication. The person who brings an olah is saying, I give everything. I hold nothing back. Kabbalistically, this is the elevation of the nefesh, the lowest level of soul, rising upward through fire to reconnect with its source. The minha, the meal offering, is brought by someone who may not have the means for an animal. It's flour and oil and frankincense. And the Zohar teaches that the minha is no less powerful than the olah, because what matters is not the size of the offering, but the kavanah, the intention behind it. A poor person who brings a handful of flour with a broken heart and genuine desire to draw close, that offering ascends higher than the wealthiest man's bull brought out of obligation. This is one of the most radical teachings in the Zohar. It completely levels the playing field. Spiritual power is not determined by what you can afford. It's determined by the quality of your consciousness. A person with nothing who turns to God with everything they have creates a greater unification in the upper worlds than someone going through the motions with the finest ram. The Zohar sees right through externals. It always has. The Shelamim, the peace offering, is about wholeness. The word Shelamim comes from Shalom, which itself derives from Shalem, means complete. This offering creates harmony between the upper and lower worlds. Part goes to the altar, part to the priest, part to the one who brings it. Everyone participates. The Zohar connects this to the unification of all 6 Sefirot of Zeir Anpin with Malkuth, the complete circuit of divine energy flowing and returning. Then we have the Chatat, the sin offering, the Asham, the guilt offering. These are brought when something has gone wrong, when a person has created a blemish, a pagam, a separation between themselves and the divine. The Chatat addresses unintentional sins, moments where you missed the mark without meaning to. You didn't set out to create damage, but damage was created. The Asham addresses trespass, where you knew better, but something pulled you off course. Maybe desire overrode wisdom. Maybe the reactive nature won for a moment. Both of these are not punishments. They are repair mechanisms. Tikkun in action. The Zohar frames them as the soul's way of acknowledging the breach and actively closing it. You come before God not with excuses, but with awareness. And that awareness, combined with the offering, creates the repair. King David captured this perfectly in Psalm 51. The offerings of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. God, you will not despise. The Zohar cites this verse directly. The real offering is the inner condition, the brokenness that creates an opening. When the ego cracks, light enters. So, here's the question that every serious student of this Parashah has to wrestle with. We don't have a temple. We don't have a physical altar. The sacrificial system, as described in Leviticus, has not been operational for nearly 2,000 years. So, what do we do with all of this? The Zohar anticipated this question. It teaches that after the destruction of the temple, 3 things replaced the Korbanot. They are prayer, Torah study, and acts of loving kindness. But these are not inferior substitutes. They are the inner dimension of what the Korbanot always pointed to. The physical offerings were the garment. Prayer, study, and Chesed are the soul of the offering. When you pray with kavanah, with genuine intention, you are performing a korban. You are drawing the Sefirot together. When you sit down and study the Zohar or any dimension of Torah with real depth, you are creating the same unification that the priest once created at the altar. And when you perform an act of genuine kindness, not for reward, not for recognition, but because that is the nature of the light, you are bringing a shelamim. You are creating shalom between the upper and lower worlds. The Zohar teaches that the fragrance of the offerings sustain the world, and it connects this to the principle of sweetening the gevurot, the harsh judgment. When the 5 gevurot rise upward like a fragrance and reach their source in da'at, they are sweetened. The harshness of the world is softened. Today, your prayer is that fragrance. Your study is that fragrance. Your generosity of spirit is that fragrance. And here's what I want you to really hear. The Zohar on Vayikra teaches that the priest who served at the altar corresponds to the Sephirah of Chesed. The priest is the one who draws everything together. His service at the altar completed the 7 Sefirot. Joy and blessing flowed above and below through what he did. Now, without a temple, every person who serves God with a full heart becomes that priest. You become the one who draws the Sefirot together. Your life becomes the altar. Your daily choices become the fire that elevates or the negligence that separates. This is not metaphor. This is how the Zohar sees it. So let's bring it all together. Parashat Vayikra opens with a call, not a command, a call, an invitation born of love, and right there in the first word is a letter so small you could miss it entirely, the Alef. That Alef is the difference between purpose and accident, between a life where God is calling you by name and a life where things just happen to you. The Zohar teaches that this Alef represents Tzimtzum, contraction, humility, the willingness to make yourself small so that something greater can operate through you. And the offerings that follow, the olah, the minhah, the shelamim, the chatat, the asham, these are not primitive rituals. They are a technology of reconnection, a spiritual architecture for drawing the fragmented Sefirot back into unity. Korban means to draw close. That is the entire message of this book. You do not need a temple to do this work. You need a broken heart and an honest intention. You need to be quiet enough to hear the call. You need to be humble enough to receive it. And you need to understand that every single day, in every interaction, in every prayer, in every moment of genuine giving, you are performing the work of the Kohen at the altar. You are drawing the worlds together. The Alef is small, but it holds everything. Thank you very much for watching. If this landed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I will see you in the next video. Shalom.